A high-value woman understands that her peace is more valuable than the temporary approval of others. She no longer lives in the exhausting cycle of over-explaining, over-apologizing, or overextending herself just to be accepted. She recognizes that people-pleasing is a subtle form of self-betrayal, a habit rooted in fear, not love. Instead of constantly molding herself to fit into others' expectations, she defines herself by her own values, needs, and limits. Boundaries are not a sign of arrogance or coldness. They are a reflection of self-awareness and emotional maturity. By choosing boundaries over approval, she sends a clear message. I am not responsible for managing others' reactions to my truth. This shift liberates her from the pressure to be liked, needed, or validated. She's not afraid to disappoint others if it means being true to herself. Her self-worth no longer depends on external validation, but is anchored in her inner knowing. She doesn't perform to keep love. She stands firm in her truth and lets the right people respect it. Setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable at first, especially for someone who is taught to shrink herself for the sake of peace. But she learns that peace without authenticity is just another form of quiet suffering. The more she honors her boundaries, the more magnetic, calm, and grounded she becomes. A high-value woman knows that being clear is far more compassionate than being passive-aggressive, avoidant, or emotionally unpredictable. She no longer engages in manipulative silence or vague language to make a point. Instead, she communicates her needs, feelings, and limits with directness and grace. Many people confuse clarity with cruelty, but in truth, there's nothing more respectful than being honest about where you stand. She doesn't use guilt, sarcasm, or emotional withdrawal to express discontent. Instead, she chooses words rooted in truth and kindness, even if they are firm. This clarity protects her energy and allows the people around her to know exactly where they stand with her. She doesn't fake smiles or say yes when she means no. She has learned through experience that pleasing others at the cost of her emotional honesty only leads to resentment, confusion, and broken self-trust. Clarity means she doesn't leave room for mixed signals, emotional guessing games, or toxic emotional loops. When she ends a friendship, sets a boundary, or walks away from dysfunction, it's not out of coldness, it's out of deep love for her peace and integrity. She believes in emotional responsibility, which means saying what she means and meaning what she says. She refuses to manipulate with ambiguity because she respects herself too much to engage in emotional games, and she respects others enough to be truthful. Clarity might not always be received well, especially by those who benefit from your silence, but to her, that is not a reason to stay silent. She speaks with intention, and her truth, though firm, is always rooted in love for herself and the life she's building. One of the most dangerous things a high-value woman learns is that not all toxic people look or sound toxic. Toxicity doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles. It shows up in carefully worded sarcasm, backhanded compliments, silent treatments, or concern that's laced with control. A high-value woman sharpens her emotional radar to detect these subtle patterns that once flew under her intuition. She realizes that some of the most damaging people in her life were the ones who meant well, who didn't say anything wrong, but whose energy consistently left her feeling small, confused, or drained. Passive aggression, fake encouragement, manipulative guilt trips, conditional love, and constant comparison are all toxic behaviors that often come wrapped in politeness, especially from people close to her, friends, coworkers, even family. She becomes aware that being treated unnicely is not the same as being treated with respect. Real love doesn't leave you emotionally exhausted or second-guessing your worth after every interaction. As she grows, she learns to stop dismissing her discomfort just because someone was polite on the surface. She no longer ignores the inner voice that whispers, "This doesn't feel safe, even if it looks okay." This emotional immaturity allows her to set boundaries not only with people who are overtly toxic, but also with those who wear masks, those who use charm to control or kindness to conceal manipulation. She starts to value emotional safety over superficial harmony. Her presence becomes selective, and her circle becomes smaller, not out of bitterness, but out of self-protection and clarity. She no longer needs someone to raise their voice to recognize disrespect. Emotional unease is reason enough to create space. That awareness becomes one of her greatest powers. A high-value woman knows that healing is not just about feeling better. It's about breaking lifelong emotional patterns that kept her stuck, small, or silent. She begins to realize that what she once called a loathe was often trauma bonding, and what she once saw as a loyalty was sometimes fear of abandonment. The more she heals, the less tolerance she has for emotional chaos, manipulation, or inconsistency. Healing teaches her that it's not her job to fix broken people, absorb their pain, or sacrifice herself to feel worthy. She stops normalizing behavior that once felt familiar but was never healthy. Toxicity may have felt like home because it mirrored patterns from her past, but healing helps her build a new home within herself, one that's rooted in peace, not survival. As her emotional awareness deepens, she stops chasing validation from people who dismiss her worth. She no longer tries to earn love through suffering or prove her value through endurance. She becomes less reactive and more reflective, no longer feeling the need to argue, explain, or convince. The triggers that once had power over her begin to lose their grip, not because life becomes easier, but because she becomes stronger, wiser, and more self-compassionate. She starts making decisions not from her wounds, but from her wisdom. Healing shifts her from asking, "Why don't they treat me better?" to asking, "Why did I allow that for so long?" This self-awareness doesn't come overnight, but each boundary she sets, each toxic tie she releases, and each moment she chooses herself over dysfunction becomes a declaration of growth. She realizes that the version of herself who tolerated toxic people no longer exists. And that's how she knows the cycle is broken. A high-value woman understands the quiet, revolutionary power of the word a no. Not a no, because not a no, I hope you understand. Just no. Period. Full stop. She no longer feels the need to cushion her boundaries and softness just to be palatable. She no longer crafts elaborate justifications to avoid disappointing others, because she has finally accepted a powerful truth. Her a no is enough. Her boundary is valid even if it's not understood, liked, or accepted by others. She doesn't need to wait for permission to protect her peace. She doesn't require agreement to honor her capacity. The emotional labor of constantly explaining herself over and over was something she once offered freely, but no more. She has reclaimed her voice and now uses it with precision, not apology. Saying a no used to bring her anxiety, tightness in her chest, guilt in her stomach, worry about how others might react. But now, after the hard inner work of healing and reclaiming her self-worth, she sees that a no is not rejection. It is redirection. It is an act of self-respect. It's not about pushing people away. It's about pulling herself closer to what matters: peace, alignment, authenticity. A woman who has mastered the art of saying a no without anger, fear, or guilt has mastered emotional freedom. She doesn't need drama to create distance. She simply decides that her energy, time, and love are sacred, and not everyone gets access. Her refusal is not cold, it's clear. Her boundary is not an act of defiance. It's an act of devotion to her mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And when someone pushes back, demands an explanation, or tries to guilt her into a yes, she does not fold. She does not over-explain. She breathes, she pauses, and she repeats it with grace. No, a high-value woman doesn't need to make a scene to make a statement. She practices emotionally intelligent detachment, a quiet but profound act of self-preservation. She doesn't chase closure from people who thrive on chaos. She doesn't try to fix those who repeatedly hurt her. She understands that walking away without explanation is sometimes the most respectful thing she can do for herself. Emotional intelligence teaches her that not every situation deserves a reaction. Not every insult needs a response, and not every person is worthy of her vulnerability. She doesn't waste energy trying to prove her worth to those committed to misunderstanding her. Detachment doesn't mean she's cold or indifferent. It means she no longer allows herself to be pulled into emotional whirlwinds that compromise her peace. She can love someone deeply and still walk away if respect is missing. She can forgive someone fully and still refuse to let them back into her space. This is the kind of strength that comes not from anger, but from clarity. She has learned to separate her self-worth from how others treat her. Their behavior is a reflection of them, not a measurement of her value. She no longer tries to control outcomes, change people, or carry emotional burdens that aren't hers to hold. Instead, she observes without absorbing. She listens without reacting. She protects her energy like it's sacred. Because it is, she doesn't threaten to leave to get attention. She simply exits when her spirit no longer feels safe. Her silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. And where she once stayed to avoid guilt or discomfort, she now leaves to protect her growth and her inner peace. Emotional detachment isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself without apology. A high-value woman knows her power doesn't come from how loudly she speaks, how forcefully she reacts, or how intensely she argues. Her true power lies in her presence, the calm, grounded energy she brings into every room, every conversation, every decision. She no longer feels the need to convince people of her worth, defend her boundaries with aggression, or perform emotional labor to maintain connections. She has learned that drama is a distraction, a trap that pulls you into a cycle of reactivity and emotional exhaustion. And she refuses to live her life on that frequency. Her silence, her pause, her ability to walk away without raising her voice. All of these are testaments to her inner strength. She doesn't try to out-scream the chaos. She simply removes herself from it. Her refusal to engage in emotional games isn't passivity, it's mastery. She chooses peace over performance, reflection over reaction. She understands that the most powerful response to toxicity is no response at all, not out of fear or weakness, but because her energy is too sacred to be wasted on proving anything to anyone. This kind of self-control doesn't come from ego. It comes from emotional intelligence and hard-earned self-respect. She doesn't need to retaliate, gossip, or get even. Her detachment is her elevation. She understands that a woman who has learned to regulate her emotions, even in the presence of chaos, becomes untouchable. Her value is felt, not flaunted. Her confidence is quiet but undeniable. People may not always understand her calm, but they feel it. It commands the room without demanding attention. She no longer seeks validation through being the loudest voice or the last word. She knows her dignity isn't found in proving herself to the wrong people. It's in knowing when to walk away with her head high, her heart intact, and her peace untouched. A high-value woman no longer waits for the world to tell her who she is. She no longer relies on approval, attention, or affection to feel complete. Her value is no longer dependent on her relationship status, her appearance, her popularity, or how easy she is to be around. Her worth is internal, rooted in her character, her growth, her standards, and her ability to choose herself even when it's hard. She doesn't chase worth in achievements or people. She embodies it. Because she understands that value is not something you earn, it's something you remember. She stops seeking herself in the eyes of others and starts defining herself through her truth, her boundaries, and her emotional integrity. She's not afraid to be misunderstood, judged, or disliked because she no longer needs external confirmation to feel grounded. She recognizes that people's perception of her says more about their lens than her light. She doesn't shrink herself to fit into broken spaces. She expands with grace and lets anything or anyone that can't rise with her naturally fall away. This self-defined value becomes the compass for every decision she makes. It tells her what to walk away from, what to fight for, and what to protect. She doesn't engage in relationships that require her to perform, compete, or earn love. She knows she is already enough without striving, proving, or pleasing. And this knowing changes everything. It frees her from the cycles of emotional dependency and attachment to toxic validation loops. It gives her the courage to be authentic, even if it means standing alone. Because she would rather walk alone in truth than be surrounded by people who only love the version of her that sacrifices her needs. She understands that not everyone will see her worth. And that's okay. The right people won't need convincing. The right spaces won't require her to shrink. The more she honors her own value, the more aligned her life becomes. Not with noise, but with truth. So if you find yourself questioning your worth, begging for clarity, or bending yourself in half just to be enough for people who don't see you, pause, breathe, and remember who you are. You are not here to shrink for love, to silence your truth for harmony, or to carry the weight of someone else's unhealed wounds. You are here to be whole, to be bold in your boundaries, soft in your heart, and fierce in your self-respect. Let your growth offend those who benefited from your silence. Let your standards intimidate those who thrived off your desperation. Because the moment you choose yourself, the real, unapologetic, emotionally intelligent you don't just protect your peace, you reclaim your power, and that is what makes you truly high value.